Today I'm going to tell you another sadly revealing story. I will tell you about what is not customary to talk about. I will tell you about such a phenomenon as orphan trains. Yes, I have already told you about this. I have already told you about orphan trains of the early 20th century. But I didn't talk about orphan trains of our days. I could not imagine that such a phenomenon as orphan trains could survive to this day. I understand the end of the 19th century. There is an active development of America. There are not enough people, a disenfranchised rape seed is needed, and therefore a stream of children has gone from England, France, Italy, and Spain to America. These children were taken from unreliable parents in Europe, picked up on the streets, and sent to America by wards of Catholic orphanages. Also in America itself, children from the cities of the East Coast were taken by trains inland, given them into slavery to farmers. So, from 1853 to 1929 year, a charitable organization worked tirelessly in America. This department of hell on earth gathered children in coastal cities of the USA and sent them to farmers inland, where these children enjoyed a happy American childhood without unbending their backs. From 1853 to 1929, 250,000 children were sent inland. In general, there was a real mess going on in America. The children were sent to it is unclear to whom, and no one was interested in the further fate of these children. No one asked how they were doing, how their health was. And in general, no one asked if these children were alive or not. That's all in the past, of course. There have been a lot of incredibly scary things going on in the past. But now, today, we are already living in a happy new world, where children are treated, they are taken care of. Children are taken away from those parents whom society will call not tolerant. In general, today hundreds of organizations are engaged in the protection of children's rights. This is of course good. But here's the bad thing. Orphan trains have returned to America. And they began to transport even more children than at the beginning of the 20th century. It's unbelievable, but it's a fact. In our modern world, something has appeared that should have disappeared in disgrace 100 years ago. Orphan trains have returned to our world. Of course, the world has changed and today children are not carried in cattle cars. Today, they are carried by cars and buses of the Border Patrol. But this did not make the children's lives any better and safer. Hundreds of thousands of children are taken from relatives at the border with Mexico and taken away to an unknown destination. They are sent to unknown sponsors who have somehow agreed with the US social services. And most importantly, after the children were given to an unknown sponsor, no one is watching the fate of the children. In other words, no one is interested in what sponsors do with these children, what films they shoot, what family photos they have taken. In other words, today hundreds of thousands of children are being sent to nowhere in the same way as it was 100 years ago. All this madness began in 2021 year. This year, 122,000 children were taken into custody in the United States without parents. 122,000 are the children of migrants, and this is only for 1 year. That's how this whole mess started. The Trump administration used the so-called 42nd section of the Public Health Act. In other words, Trump, under the guise of fighting the pandemic, expelled all asylum seekers from the United States. He sent both singles and whole families. That is why in the 2020 year, refugees went to the United States twice as much as in the 2019. who is interested in the whole history of lawlessness and all that is happening on the border, watch the videos on Boost. It tells everything in detail about the circus of open borders. So, Trump actively sent refugees to Mexico. Then Biden came, and his administration allowed teenagers and children to come to the country. Well, not really allowed. It is today that the borders are open. In 2021, they just launched their mean plan. They continued to deport some families to Mexico and at the same time stopped deporting unaccompanied children. That is, those children who crossed the border themselves in the company of the same children. And look what came of it. Those families who were deported to Mexico were forced to make a very difficult decision. Mexico is a very dangerous country. Cartels are being robbed in this country. The Mexican police are also robbing refugees. It is simply dangerous to stay in this country, and therefore, for the sake of the safety of their children, refugees sent children alone across the border. Children are also sent across the border with distant relatives. Here is a real example of a 14-year-old boy who came from Guatemala with his 20-year-old sister and her son. When they applied to the border guard for asylum, they were placed in separate cells. 3 days later, the boy was sent to another place, without even being allowed to say goodbye to his sister. Under Trump, children were also separated from their parents and guardians. The parents were in one cell of the deportation prison, the children in another. And often it lasted for several months. Sometimes children died in prison. Under Biden, children are almost not kept in a deportation prison. They are processed very quickly, looking for guardians on unknown resources, and sent to all corners of the country. So today, millions of migrants enter the United States every year. Sometimes these are full-fledged families, where children go with mom and dad, and these families are almost never separated at the border. But children also go with aunts, grandmothers, and sisters. And in this case, the US government takes the children and sends them to an unknown destination, violating the Convention on the Rights of the Child of 1989 year, which says that countries should not separate families. The United States has signed this convention, but has not ratified it. Therefore, children are quietly taken from their parents at the US border. They separate brothers and sisters, grandchildren and grandfathers. In general, children are taken away for no one knows what purpose. The numbers are huge. In 2022 year, the authorities received 150,000 unaccompanied minors at the US-Mexico border. About 72% are aged 15 and older, although there are also infants and toddlers. It turns out that in 2 years, the US authorities transported more children inland than in the entire history of orphan trains of the 19th century. Let me remind you that 250,000 children were transported in 75 years. Today, the numbers are much higher. In 2021, 122,000, in 2022, 152,000. That is, in just 2 years, 274,000 children and teenagers were sent inland. And the future fate of these children is very vague. These children are handled by the Ministry of Health and Social Services. But in the 2022 year, this ministry was criticized for not tracking children after handing them over to sponsors. Many children end up working grueling and dangerous jobs, Violating child labor laws. Here's Grandma and St. George's Day for you. In 2024 year, America reached the orphan trains of the late 19th century. Yes, life is getting better. Life becomes more fun. That's it. Watch my channel.